Hi, everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. My name is Wendy O'Connell, and I'm sure that pretty much everyone in our viewing audience remembers Hamelman's Bakery that was here in downtown Brattleboro. Well, today we have Jeffrey Hamelman as our guest, and we're very glad that he's here with us today talking about when he was here in Brattleboro and other things that he's done in his life. Since then, he has become worldwide known as a premier baker. After leaving Brattleboro, Jeffrey went on to become the 76th certified master baker in the United States. He was the captain of Baking Team USA, which is the World Cup of Baking held in Paris. And in 1999, he became the bakery director of King Arthur Flour in Norwich, Vermont. There he established their baking education center and their production bakery, and that's where he worked and taught until his retirement in 2017. This year, a new edition of his book, which was an award-winning book on baking called Simply Bread, A Baker's Book of Techniques and Recipes, is coming out, new edition, and it should be out imminently. So, welcome, Jeffrey. We are so glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Wendy. It's a real pleasure for me, too. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, we would love to have you in the studio in Brattleboro so you could come and get back to your stomping grounds, but here we are on Zoom and, we'll take what we can get. I want to just sort of dive into your time in Brattleboro because so many folks remember Hamelman so fondly, and you were here for 14 years, which is a good piece of time from 83 to 97.
Right.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about being in Brattleboro and part of the community?
Sure. Well, I had first come to Brattleboro in the 70s, and I was very, very attracted to the town for all the right reasons. And I was living on Martha's Vineyard for a while, and with my then wife and 3 kids, and wanted to leave and move to Vermont full time because I really felt like that's where I belonged. And I wanted to start a bakery before I was 33 years old. That was just a kind of small goal. And coming to Brattleboro was really a decision of the heart, not a decision of the head, because if I stood back and looked at it objectively, I never would have been opening a bakery anywhere because I didn't have money. I didn't have business skills. I'm a college dropout, and I didn't have any of those kinds of skills. But all I had was 7 years of baking experience and a desire to raise my kids in Brattleboro. So I borrowed some money from my mother-in-law and opened up the business in Harmony parking lot on December 5th, 1983, the anniversary of Mozart's death, for less than $17,000. It was kind of crazy. The sign out front was poster board from the art store with a magic marker, and inside there was no cash registers. There wasn't money. So there was a silverware tray, and instead of knives, it was ones, and instead of forks, it was fives, kind of thing. And there were 2 tables and 3 chairs. And if a 4th person came along, they got a 5-gallon bucket with an apron on top. And it seemed logical. I had this feeling that my hope was that people would say, wow, that was a nice piece of cake, rather than I'm sitting on a bucket. And I also had this feeling like I didn't want to be kind of strangled psychologically by huge monthly payments if I had borrowed a whole lot of money to start the business. I figured if my baking skills are good, then the business will go okay. If they're not good, then I shouldn't be there in the first place. So anyway, that's how I started the bakery.
Yeah, and I remember it really well. I think there's so many of us who actually had little kids at that time, so we would come in with our kids. I remember the bucket, but more than that, I remember the goods, and the goods were real good. And we came back for more and more. And you had good coffee too, which was really unusual at that time.
Yeah, well, that would have gone back probably to my first job. I started baking in 1976, September 1st in Northampton for a German woman, Susan Nagela. And she was precise enough with incredibly high standards that if you ordered coffee from her, this is the mid 70s, late 70s, you got French press,
Mm,
which was unheard of
hmm.
basically back
Hmm.
then,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Mm.
Now we had Chemixes, right? We had a Chemix strip,
Huh.
pretty much. That's the highest we went. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah. Well, and that your time with Suzanne in Northampton was really kind of the renaissance of Northampton, in the late
Yeah.
70s.
Yeah, she had a lot to do with that. She had a bakery on a small side street, which is where I met her, and was very intrigued by what she was doing. The first time I met her, I said, "What's that bakery doing there? That I've never seen a bakery there. I've walked on the street 1,000 times." And so she saw me kind of gaping um, it was at a loading dock height, and I was outside and the loading dock door was open, and eventually she just came over because I was just kind of staring at her. And we started talking, and it was very intriguing. And I was making terrible homemade bread at the time, like so many of us were, right? Doorstop
Yes.
type stuff. The goat would like it more than the humans, sort of thing. And eventually she went over to the bread rack and she came back and she gave me a loaf of rye bread and she said, "This is the best bread of the day." And she gave me this horribly burned loaf. And I felt like I didn't want to insult her. So I took it and figured she was either throwing it in the trash or giving it to the gullible kid. And of course, when I ate it, I had one of those moments that rivets you in place, right? One of those food epiphanies.
Yeah.
And about a year later, I asked her if she'd hire me, and she said, "No, you can't bake. You're an American." And okay, fine. So every 3 or 4 weeks, I went back and said, "Susan, would you hire me? You can't bake. You're an American." The only time she didn't say that was I knew where she lived, and I had made a loaf of, I'm sure, horrible looking homemade bread, and I knocked on her door at 8 o'clock in the morning. She opened the door in her bathrobe. And I said, "Here, Susan, I made you some bread. Would you hire me?" And she didn't have her usual refrain. She simply slammed the door in my face. Well, one day I asked her again, and then I knew I had won because kind of the light went out of her eyes and her shoulders kind of slumped. And she said, "Okay, I'll hire you, but you have to make the pretzels." I said, "Okay, I'll do anything. I'll do anything." So wearing down her very considerable Teutonic resistance was probably the best accomplishment of my life. So she hired me to make the pretzels, but within 2 weeks, it was like, "Oh, remember Zet Challah, Zet you brought me, Zet your grandmother's recipe? We will start to make Zat on Fridays. And now you will make the Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte. And now you will make the
Wow.
Dreistufen
Wow.
Sauerteigbrun." All these German things that she
Yeah.
couldn't do anymore because she was managing the business.
Uh-huh.
And her pastry chef was a Parisian, and her main bread baker was he was from Grenoble. And the Frenchies didn't want any of that German stuff. So she came
Uh,
to me with all of it. So I was having this extremely hybrid 5 years making all these incredible French products and then
yeah.
all these great German classics. So it couldn't have been better.
Wonderful. It was trial by fire, literally.
With her, it was for sure. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
literally. I remember once I made something she didn't like. Literally, it
Uh-huh.
was sailing towards my head. She threw it right at me.
Really?
You could get away with that. This was still the dark ages in that
Right.
sense.
Right, right, right. They didn't call it abuse back then, right?
No, it was what you did, I guess.
Yeah. Somewhere in between here, Jeffrey, you went to CIA, not like the FBI CIA, but the Culinary Institute of America.
Yes, that was so. Yeah, the bakery started in '83. And then in '97, I had a rather protracted and very unnecessarily expensive and painful divorce from my former wife, who was co-owner of the bakery. And her lawyer was slicker than mine. And in the divorce settlement, she got the bakery.
Mhm.
Um, which understandably was pretty devastating to me, but that was just the way it happened. Well, some months prior to that, I had been approached by CIA on a couple of occasions if I was interested in going there to be an instructor and this and that. And I said the same thing to them every time, which is, no, I own a bakery in Brattleboro and that's where I'm going to live and die, but thanks for the offer. Well, when I lost the bakery, I let them know I was available and they hired me. So I was there for 2 years, and then it was a pretty magical place in many ways. It's a real palace, CIA. It's also rather Machiavellian in a lot of ways,
Mm,
and I didn't really fit that well. I loved the students, but I didn't get along that well with the administration.
mm,
And King Arthur offered me the opportunity to start a production bakery and the Baking Education Center in 1996, not 1999,
mhm,
and I was overjoyed to come back to Vermont. I
mm.
always felt really like, I don't like these license plates. I want green license plates. And so coming back to Vermont was just this such a wonderful feeling.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so great. That's so great. So you've been up there and living up north since then. So 20 years. You really established a reputation uh, with the CIA getting in touch with you and also being on the Baking Team USA, which was, I believe, in 96.
That was 96. Yeah, that's the Coupe du Monde de la Boulangerie. That's considered to be the most prestigious bread competition in the world. It happens every 4 years in Paris, and it's 12 countries. Each country sends 3 bakers,
Mm, mm,
um, and it's pretty incredible. And I was captain of the 1996 team
mhm.
while I was still owning the bakery in Brattleboro. I
Really?
was, yeah, yeah.
Did we know that then? Did we know how famous
Um,
you were?
I don't know. I don't know. I
I
mean,
don't
I
know.
don't really try to promote things, you know. I
Yeah,
would feel a little bit self-conscious if I was putting up big
yeah,
signs saying that I'm going to Paris, but I mean, I'm sure a lot of people knew.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So your reputation was out there though. How did that happen? Being here in Brattleboro.
Um, I don't really know. I know the world of baking is fairly small, and
Mhm,
so to have a good reputation is a great feeling, but it's not necessarily a great accomplishment. I've just always loved baking and loved bakers,
mm,
and uh, I guess I always just wanted to be, as good as I could be.
mm.
And having had 5 years with French and Germans was an incredible.
Yes,
Because this, by the way, was also before America went into the quote unquote artisan bread,
that's
artisan
right.
baking era,
That's
right?
right.
This is kind
Yeah.
of the dark ages.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it was completely different back then. We were making bread out of, the Moosewood cookbook and
Of
all of
course, in
those,
Tasahara, right?
right? And they were doorstops, many of
Yeah.
them. I had a rice bread man that could have kept out all kinds of invaders. Um, you know, Jeffrey, I know that one thing that sort of travels with everything that you do is this sort of deep love of the origin and the evolution of bread. And you have gone into the history, you've delved into the history of bread making over the eons. Um, and I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, because there seems to be such a reverence for bread in everything that you do, obviously, especially in bread making, and a responsibility that you feel toward that too.
Well, absolutely. Um, it's worth noting that there are rice cultures and corn cultures and manioc cultures, which are as long and deep as bread cultures, grain cultures.
Mm-hmm.
My life has been engaged with bread culture, not rice culture or corn culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, within the universe of bread culture, um, bread was for so many centuries a completely central food that comprised often more than 50% of the calories that somebody would eat, particularly the lower classes of society. and bread represented the fuel that gave humans the strength to do the work of society. So I
Mm-hmm.
always looked at the baker as having one of the most fundamental jobs in society, and in a sense being the lowest person in society, in the following way: that if you this is a little fanciful because bread isn't as big a part of our overall caloric intake anymore, but the way I envisioned it was that if you look at a giant skyscraper, the thing that's holding it up is the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
The foundation isn't strong, the skyscraper is going to fall down. Well, I looked at bakers as the foundation that
Mm-hmm.
gave people the nourishment and the pleasure, because I think baking provides a lot of pleasure to people. But
Sure.
bakers would be the foundation upon which the rest of society could do their job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is a little bit romanticizing it. I understand that, but
Well, it's also pretty true, right? I mean, it is the staff of life, and that's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot. But I could eat toast every day, no problem.
I do eat it. No, by the way, bread is the only food that I personally eat 7 days a week. There isn't any other food that I eat
Yeah.
7 days a week.
Wow.
And I remember once I was going to Brazil to teach classes for a couple of weeks. I was on the plane and I said, I should at least learn a couple of phrases or sentences in Portuguese, just so I don't start yammering away in English. So I was reading a phrase book and a dictionary, and I came upon the um, Portuguese word companion. And
Oh,
then is when it
oh,
dawned on me, oh, come with pan bread, right?
perfect.
So
That's
there's these
beautiful.
subtle things that we don't think about on a conscious level
Yeah,
that connect us to this deep, deep connection that
yeah.
humans have had with bread for so many centuries.
Yes. And do you feel like a connection between other bakers in your area, the country, the world?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's not an exaggeration to talk about a global community of bakers.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not at all. And it's an incredibly wonderful thing. And this is somewhat new because, well, look, if you knew a baker in Japan 30 years ago, you'd write him a letter and a month later you'd get one back. And now you can send an email and 10 minutes later get one back. So just the way that social media has kind of shortened the distance between people is pretty
Yes.
remarkable.
Yeah.
So in the last few days, I've had emails going back and forth with bakers in South Africa and Australia and Russia, and it's pretty amazing.
That is amazing. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about your the rigor of baker's hours, which I know that certainly at when your time at King Arthur that you adhered to that as well. And is there a feeling of a kind of baker's guild? Did there used to be baker's guilds?
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
there still are. Yeah, certainly. There are lots of bakers' guilds, right? In France, the Compagnon de Devoir was a big bakers' guild. And in America, since 1990, what, three or two, the Bread Bakers Guild of America has
Oh,
been a
really?
really great place where like-minded bakers kind of hang out literally and figuratively.
So if you could talk a little bit about becoming a master baker and kind of holding that place.
Okay, that's a designation that involved the certified master baker was a test that was developed and administered by an American baking trade group called Retail Bakers of America.
Mm.
And the reason why I did it was simply because I was at the CIA at the time, and there was some testing coming up. And I think CIA liked it if their instructors had fancy initials after their name, so it made them look good. And if you had an umlaut, you probably got a raise because it was pretty. Forget about that. Anyway, so they were paying chefs. They were paying the fee for chefs to take the certified master baker's exam, which was 2 or 3 day test that involved making a pretty broad genre of products. So everything from breads to a mystery item to cakes that were decorated with roses and writing on them. So it was fairly broad-based in terms of the skills you had to demonstrate. I did well enough to win, so
That's great. So you've got initials after your name.
I got an yes, and I have a pin somewhere too.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Well, the fact of the matter is that you are a master baker, and you were recognized as such, and to go through that kind of the rigor of that kind of test as well. And just going back to King Arthur for a minute, I know that you established the teaching school there, giving classes. And how did you like that? Did you enjoy teaching?
I adore teaching.
You did.
Yeah, because of the camaraderie with fellow bakers, the King Arthur's, the classroom facility was excellent.
Yeah.
The whole company is excellent. People loved coming to King Arthur. And so I taught the professional classes for 18 years, I guess, while I was there. And actually, I continued after I left King Arthur because they didn't have anybody in-house who could take those classes on.
Mhm.
I was the director of the bakery, but I should note that the Baking Education Center, which is now called the Baking School, the King Arthur Baking School, it's much bigger than I could have managed
Mm.
along with the bakery. So that has got a whole different team of people. So
Mhm.
after it opened in 2000, my role was teaching the professional classes.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
not running it. So I ran the bakery, but not the school.
Yes. In the last few years, and I think probably before you left King Arthur, you started doing some traveling. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and going to different countries and teaching there as well.
right. I mean, it must be pretty clear by now that I'm pretty much a one-trick pony, right? So baking's kind of
I don't think
been
I'd
my
say that, but
anyway. Yeah, so the travel mostly was a result of having written a book on bread making that you mentioned at the beginning of the show that came
yes.
out in 2004 and is about to have a third edition in a matter of days that'll be published. But a lot of the traveling was the stuff that wasn't just pleasure traveling, was because the book has been translated into a lot of different languages. And so it's been pretty common that when it's in a new language, I get a request to come and teach.
Oh,
So that's brought me to
wow.
6 continents,
Oh.
which is pretty exciting. Yeah, my sourdough has got its own passport.
That's one of the questions I've got on my list here, about sourdough, which let's just skip over to that for a minute. During the pandemic, sourdough, people wax poetic on sourdough. Could you wax poetic for us a little bit on sourdough?
Yeah, I mean, when I was getting ready to leave my first job, my boss, Susan, the German woman, she said, "Would you like me to show you how to make a German style rye sourdough?" And I said to myself, maybe there's going to be some sourdough in my future. So why not? So she just told me what to do. And I still have my little hand scrawled notes that began on August 28th, 1980, of mixing flour and water together and making a sourdough. And I mean, that sourdough was the backbone of the bakery in Brattleboro, and it was with me at CIA, and it was the backbone of the bakery at King Arthur. It's still in use 7 days a week at King Arthur, and I um, have some here at home, which I feed 7 days a week. These little mini feedings of 20 grams of flour and that sort of thing. And yeah, one of my great joys is when I teach overseas, I always bring the sourdough with me.
Hmm.
Um, I was teaching at a really wonderful food celebration conference festival in Australia a number of years ago, and the flight had a layover in Dubai, and I'll betcha I'm the only person who has ever refreshed his sourdough culture in the restroom at Dubai airport.
That's the title of a short story right there, Jeffrey. Ah.
But the other great thing about it is, um, I really believe in sharing. I love bakers and I love sharing. And I don't like secrets because they're very lonely. Because if I keep a secret from somebody, well, then there's no opportunity for dialogue, right? So it doesn't make any sense to me. And why wouldn't I share everything that I've learned? It's not like I made this stuff up. It's like I learned it from working with other bakers or just reading or whatever. So anyway, when I travel and teach bread classes, one of the things I usually do is demonstrate how to dry a culture so that you can quote unquote preserve its DNA and leave it in sort of suspended animation for a year or more and then revive it and bake with it. So it's a good backup culture. So I'll
Mhm.
demonstrate it. And then when the demonstration is over, I tell students that anybody who would like some, here it is. It's dried out. This is how you refresh it. So if you'd like some, we'll put it in bags and all you have to do is sign an affidavit that you're actually going to feed it and you can have it, right? So, I mean, I've taught a number of times in Russia in the last few years, and it's incredibly fulfilling to know from students who tell me that they came to St. Petersburg for the class and they took the sourdough 10,000 kilometers to their bakery in Siberia where it's making bread. And with that, I mean, who wouldn't want to share if you knew that you could have that kind of impact on people?
That's really exciting. I
Oh,
mean,
it's so fun.
there's so many wonderful elements that go into what you're talking about, the sense of community, the sense of sharing, but also the alchemy, right, of
Yeah.
what sourdough actually is.
Yeah, what sourdough actually is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this, you started by talking about the number of people who have turned to sourdough baking because of the pandemic. I think I mean, how can it not be wonderful? Right?
Exactly, exactly. I had I think someone was on the show and she was talking about she worked and worked and worked at it and finally it wasn't happening and she was dumping it down the drain and her roommate came in screaming saying it was like killing her child to throw it down the drain.
I don't go that far. I'm not one of these people who has named my sourdough, which is, I think it's kind of typical that people name it. But by the way, when I think about this one that I started August 28th, 1980, you know, let's say you have a moderate sized bakery and you're making 1,000 sourdough loaves a week with your sourdough culture. That's not a great deal of bread, but let's just say 1,000 a
Mhm.
week, and you bake for 50 weeks a year. Well, there's 50,000 loaves, and if you have that bakery and that sourdough for 20 years, you've just made 1 million loaves of bread.
Yeah,
And and so
you've,
how many people have you nourished over the years doing
that's
that?
right.
So just to have that kind of living vitality from a sourdough culture can
Yeah.
be an enormously great feeling for a baker.
Your book. It's called Bread, A Baker's Book of Techniques and Recipes. It's coming up for this new edition. Can you talk about the new edition because it's a little bit different from the one that you started out with in 2004?
Yeah, it's different in a lot of ways. One is that first edition was 2004, second edition was 2013, and now it's the third edition. And each edition has hopefully reflected my development as a baker. So I feel like I'm a better baker now than I have been in my life. Um, and so hopefully the new edition is a reflection of that. I think it's much broader now, for one thing. Um, but another thing that gave me great joy was the editor, who was very open to my ideas when I had been talking about the origins of the book. The third edition, there's a new editor, and she didn't know the trajectory of it from the beginning. And I told her that, Wiley was really great to me. That's the publishing company, John Wiley and Sons, because even though I was an unknown author, they said, we want to hear your voice, so we just do what you want. And so the only time they vetoed me was when I asked if the book could be anonymous, because I felt like it's about a topic, it's not about a person. They said, no, that's not going to happen. And then I was telling that to the editor of the third edition when I met her. And then I said, I'm so glad that I got vetoed, because the book is opened so many doors to me in so many different places.
Mhm.
And then I had this great idea, and she was all over it. And I said, what about if each of the bread chapters um, ends with two of these wonderful bakers I've met over the years in different countries having a spotlight on them, and we'll have a photo of them, and they'll do a special product from their bakery, and we'll have a little blurb about them. And she was all over that. So now there are 10 bakers from, oh my goodness, Japan, South Africa, 2 people from Russia, Spain, Australia. So all these different bakers with different perspectives, different skills, who are just wonderful and as committed as you could ever ask for a baker to be. And they're going to have a spotlight in the book. And I absolutely love that.
That's really
Yeah.
wonderful. And it just so matches your philosophy of always being a human connection, and bringing more and more people in and sharing, and having the bread go out into the world
Mm,
by different hands, and with different takes on it and different grains
mm.
as well, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. There's
Um,
one bread that's the bread is leavened by raw honey and salt. There's no sourdough. There's no yeast,
wow,
raw
wow.
honey and salt. How about that?
Well, yeah, this is something to look forward to. This new book. We have, we still have a healthy bookstore in Brattleboro, which is really
Mm,
wonderful. A wonderful used bookstore as well, but everyone's books, I'm sure, will be carrying it. Um, I also want to mention that your book, when it came out in 2004, won the Julia Child Award for Best New Cookbook of the Year, which is another great accolade as well. Um, and also, Jeffrey, I do want to let you know that there is a nice little turnkey bakery business for sale on Main Street, Brattleboro. I'm just throwing it out there, much like you might throw out a sourdough starter. Okay.
don't tempt me, but wouldn't it be interesting if the sourdough brought me back to Brattleboro, right?
Yes, yes, we would love that. Yeah, it
Mm.
would be so exciting. Anyway, thank you so much, Jeffrey. It was a delight.
For me as well.
Yeah.
Thank you too.
And thanks to everyone for tuning in today. It's nice to have another little look at an old friend. Hamelman's is such a big part of Brattleboro. Um, so tune in. Remember, we are available on the BCTV channel, 1075, and you can also see us on Facebook and some other social media. So tune in, and we will see you again next week.